Hunting season's just about to open throughout the whitetails range. Open in a few states already, but most of us are September 15th, October 1st. I don't know about you, man, I'm shooting all the time, scouting, getting stuff ready. It's almost here. And two of the most common things hunters want to know: where are deer feeding and where are they bedding? We've talked a lot in the past about native vegetation, food plot prep. You know, it may be a wicked drought like it is right here in the Ozarks. We had the driest August on record. September's not looking a lot better, but you know what? Deer also gonna bed. They're gonna spend a lot of hours in a bedding area every day. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about bedding areas. And it's not that someone's trying to tell you a story. I think they forget to put it in context. So there's a couple great studies. One out of Pennsylvania, that group's doing some great work. Mississippi State's doing some great work. Georgia's always in the running there. Then you got all the internet folks out there, boy, you know, hinge cut here, do this there. But you forget to add context. And I want to take some time to talk about that today. So deer want to bed where they're secure. And security for a deer almost always means a swirling wind. Use that nose to detect predators or threats 360 degrees or as much out of circle as you can. It's rare in the midday when the thermals are all, usually it's warm, they're rushing up unless there's some aberrant weather going on. Warm air rises. You know, when it's 30 degrees, but it's sunny right over here, it's still rising up. So warm air rises, cool air sinks. I'm not so worried about bedding at nighttime. They're bedding the food plot out in the open in the field. You see those beds out there. I'm talking about bedding during legal hunting hours. That's what we're going to talk about in this discussion. Research study after research study based on GPS collars, hundreds and hundreds of data points from our Moultrie mobiles, thousands, all show the same thing. Deer move at dawn and dusk. And long ago, when I was doing my master's degree on scrape behavior, some of the very first trail cameras ever used showed the same thing, dawn and dusk. That was many decades ago. Deer don't change unless there's a aberrant weather or you're on a golf course, they don't feel a threat, whatever. Deer move primarily at dawn and dusk. And I strongly believe, that's because the sun is rising or the sun is setting. Things are cooling, things are warming, and the air is churning. The thermals are going all directions. Same is true when they're bedding. They're going to spend the bulk of the day in a bedding type posture, bedding area. They'll get up and feed a little bit, but bedding's the main thing. They're not putting a lot of miles on. They want to be where they're secure. Security is the number one thing for a wild animal. They want to survive. So when they're bedded, where are they protected? And unfortunately, too many people focus on structure. You know, your hinge cutting or thick stems out of Mississippi State, that's all true and great. But even more important than that is that thermal, using that nose to get a detection of predators 360 degrees or as many degrees as you can. And that last statement's important, as many degrees as possible for the critter. We put that in context where you're hunting. If you're hunting where there's topography, you'll notice a lot of people talk about deer tend to bed right over the lip of a ridge top, usually on the downwind side, okay? That's because when the air goes over that ridge top, it gets here and starts tumbling a little bit. But warm air is rising on this side, so it's a churning, and they can have protection from 360 degrees around them or a portion thereof. What if you're in flatland? Well, a lot of things people don't think of, and I learned this many years ago when I was working for then Alumax Aluminum in South Carolina. Deer were bedding against railroad tracks and fences. There was a big fence around the plant there, and that big fence, you know, to keep the booger bear out from going into the aluminum plant doing vandalism or something, that's security for a deer. They love to bed with their back up against something, not a 4-foot log you cut the chainsaw and put down there. I don't know that deer bed in the same place over and over unless there's very limited habitat. And this is a point I want to make. Be careful about your information. The bulk of the whitetail hunters are hunting timber. We love to watch those boys in ag country shoot those big old ag bucks, but we're hunting timber country. And timber country doesn't have the bottlenecks, and so bedding can be more difficult to pinpoint. Again, putting that in context, back against a railroad track easement, a highway, something that's giving them protection on almost 180 degrees, a hard edge between a field and timber, they can get some protection on their backside and use the wind on their front side. So think about when you're defining bedding, where are deer getting the most protection within that home range, within roughly that square mile? And then how can you create it? Well, hinge cutting 20 trees in the middle of a hardwood forest is probably not going to make security cover. I know that just busts a lot of bubbles, especially in the South. I work property after property. I'm leaving this afternoon to go work 2 properties by Nashville and 1 down in Alabama, timber country. And people always ask about hinge cuttings because folks online made that popular, but I've worked property after property in South that hinge cut, and maybe the first year they use it if they did a big enough area. But our growing seasons are so long, you know, south of I-70 or I-80, that grows out of cover the first year. Then you just got a mess that takes yellow equipment to clean up. If I want to make bedding cover, I want to thin the canopy over a lot of acres and let native grasses and forbs grow up. And that's the natural habitat. I encourage all of y'all to listen to Daniel Boone's biography. It talks about seeing thousands and thousands of critters and how open it was. He didn't talk about big stands of timber. That's walking across Kentucky. And you can replicate that native habitat by doing TSI, timber stand improvement, opening the habitat, and you can get food and cover in the same area. It seems so cool to make a little 1-acre block of cover. It's really cool for 4-legged predators also. They can just walk downwind of that and smell every fawn or turkey nest in there. I like my cover blocks to be 10 acres or more. So any predator walking the downwind side can't detect all the prey species in there just like that. And that research comes from Mississippi State many decades ago, where they were doing larger clear cuts but leaving stream side management zones, little narrow blocks of cover by the stream to keep erosion out of stream, and had a bunch of hens radio collared back in the day before GPS collars, and they were going right there in those stream side management zones because it was the best cover in the neighborhood. It was also the best hunting area for predators. That little bit of cover had so many turkeys in there that those coons and possums and coyotes and foxes were just going on the downwind side of that and nailing those. Very low nest success. So when you're making a cover block, don't just think I'm making it to my advantage. You need to make it somewhat to the deer's advantage too. So any 4-legged predator can't just go downwind and wipe them out. A couple nights of that, you can bet those deer are going to bed somewhere else. So a long railroad track section, if you have one of those going through your property or highway frontage, deer can bed up and down that. And let's take that one step further. Where's the bottleneck going in there? Maybe there's a narrow bottleneck going into a bigger bedding area. Ideally, we like to make bedding areas, again 10 acres or so, about 75 or 100 yards away from a food source like a hide-ho food plot. And that way deer are going food cover, and getting there in the afternoon before dark. They don't have to travel too far, or they're returning by there and they're going to be there. They've been out all night in bigger fields or acorn flats or whatever. They stop by that little hide-ho food plot, get a snack on the way to the bed, and they show up in legal shooting light. If they're too far away, they're going to pass it and not be there. They're going to be on in the bedding area by legal shooting light. Bedding areas are in context of where you are. Yeah, if you're in Iowa and it's 90% cropland around you, that 10% of cover, that old rough slope that's just grown up, or heaven forbid it's got cedars in it or something, that's going to be covered. It's real easy to find. Anyone can find that by looking at, Google Earth or anything like that. But for the vast majority of hunters throughout the whitetail range, when you look at that map, it's tree cover everywhere. And that's where you go in and do TSI, timber stand improvement, get sun to the ground, get forbs growing, and focus on right over the ridge top on the downwind side where that air is going to churn. And if you don't have that, where deer can't get 360-degree protection around them, where can you get 180-degree protection against a hard edge? That may be a fence, a big fence, not just a low cattle fence, or a highway, a railroad track. Where's there something that's going to give deer protection as much at 360 degrees as they can?
Growing Deer is brought to you by Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's. Also by Green Cover Food Plots, Winchester, PH Outdoors, Black Widow Bows, Moultrie Mobile, Steel, Fleet Outdoor Apparel, Morel Targets. Fourth Arrow, Soil Pro Outdoors, Scorpion Venom Archery, Case IH Tractors, Burris Optics, and Redneck Hunting Blinds.
Bedding areas are where deer have as much protection, 360 degrees as you can afford them. Big 10-acre block, a really thick cover. And deer live, the habitat zone is 0 to 5 feet. 5 feet's probably stretching it, ground level. Making a bunch of cover up here isn't helping deer or turkeys. It's ground level. Providing that appropriate habitat there and scouting for that habitat. Fresh clear cuts on the slope. Man, where that wind's turning a little bit. Remember, flat on top, flat on bottom, the wind's more stable. Those side slopes, it's gonna be churning. It's tough for us to hunt, but it's great for deer to get protection from predators, 2- and 4-legged. So I know deer want to bed right off the edge of that slope. I make my hidey-ho food plot on the ridge top where they can get there before dark or returning, and it's lighted, become light enough that they get there in daylight, legal shooting light, before going right off the edge and going to bed. Those are ideal scenarios for both the hunter and the wildlife. Food often changes, but if you design your cover appropriately, or you know where it is, you have it there for whatever reason, that ridgetop, whatever, that cover will stay the same. And that's a reliable hunting location as long as you don't spook the deer in the cover. I don't want to hunt right on the edge of the bedding unless they're really desperate. I want to let deer be spooked if I'm going to alert them a ways away. They'll circle around, still use that cover spot day after day. I hope this information helps you have a better hunting season. And to me, defining better is putting more venison in the freezer and enjoying every day. One of the best ways to enjoy every day is to make sure you're in tune with the Creator's will for your life. And you do that by seeking His Word and applying it daily. Thanks for watching Growing Deer.